Esteemed delegates, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, as we gather here on the final day, the day 3 of the 15th South Asia Economic Summit, SAES XV, Unleashing an Equitable Green Transformation in South Asia, here in beautiful Kathmandu, I extend a warm welcome to each and every one of you. I'm Prajwal Joshi, economist at South Asia Watch on Trade, Economics and Environment, SAUTI. And it has been a privilege to be a part of this intellectual congregation where some of the brightest minds from across South Asia have come together to deliberate on the critical issues shaping our region's economic future. Today, we turn our focus on a topic of paramount importance, green finance, post-COP29 pathway for delivery. The climate crisis is an existential threat, and the need for sustainable financing has never been more urgent. Our esteemed panelists and keynote speaker, each a luminary in their respective fields, will share their thoughts, expertise, and insights on the pathways to green finance. I'm confident that this session will provide valuable insights and foster meaningful discussion. Let us engage in a constructive dialogue and work together to shape a sustainable future for South Asia. We have with us Dr. Ratnakar Adhikari, Chairman of SAUTI Nepal, moderating this plenary session. Please join me in giving him a warm welcome to the stage. I'm confident that with him moderating this plenary session, we are going to have an insightful and enlightening session. Now let us welcome other dignitaries to the stage. For a keynote speech, we have Mr. John Samuel, Regional Director, Oxfam in Asia. Mr. Madhu Kumar Morasaini, Member Secretary, National Planning Commission, Government of Nepal. Dr. Famida Khatun, Executive Director, Center for Policy Dialogue, CPD, Bangladesh. Mr. Radesh Pant, Chairman, VROC and Company, Nepal. Ms. Pranisa Shrestha, Head of Brand and Marketing, NMB Bank Limited, Nepal. Mr. Sanjay Basist, Director, Climate Action Network, South Asia, Kansa, Bangladesh. Thank you all for being here today, and I invite our moderator, Dr. Ratnakar Adhikari, to take the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Prajwal. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. We need a lot of energy today because we are talking about finance. And finance does not come easy. So that's the kind of challenge that we face. Let me start by welcoming all of you and welcoming the distinguished panelists, the eminent panelists here on the podium, and all of you participants and the resource persons. Green finance, which is the focus of our discussion this morning, is a much broader term than just climate finance. It comprises all forms of grant, lending, or investment that take environmental considerations into account and contribute to enhance environment sustainability. It includes, for example, financing for conservation of biodiversity, pollution abatement, waste management, circular economy, research and development for the development of green policies, green technologies, apart from climate finance, which is also important. The list goes on. However, given the overwhelming significance of climate finance in the post-UNFCCC 29 concluded in Baku last month, we will devote a major chunk of time to this. Although systemic assessment of green finance gap has not been done in South Asia, according to climate analytics, delivering the mitigation actions in their nationally determined contributions of South Asian countries would cost around 1.16 trillion, and meeting their national adaptation plan, NAP, targets would cost approximately 600 billion by 2030. So we are talking about a resource of 1.66 trillion by 2030. These figures are based on the estimates submitted by most countries, but not all of them because all of them have not submitted. But major countries have been included there. There are various players in climate finance space, and most of whom are present here. We have representative from the government, from the development partners, from the private sector, and from the non-governmental organization as well. So the purpose of this session is to discuss 6 A's of green finance. 6 A's. First is the availability. Availability of green finance means how much funding is available through bilateral, multilateral, and private channels. So bilateral channels such as various development partners can provide resources, but multilateral channels are becoming extremely important these days. The international financial institution, development banks and others are also becoming extremely important. But then private sector is also a key player in this. Then the second point is accessibility. When we are talking about accessibility of green finance, it is relating to how easy or difficult it is to access finance. I have a figure, and I was discussing this with Secretary Marashini this morning, that Green Climate Fund, because of the process that need to be completed, processes that need to be completed in order to obtain green finance support, it takes, for LDCs, it takes anywhere between 32 and 36 months to access finance. So, and then that actually compromises the whole objective of accessibility. That's one example, there could be others. Third is the ability. When I talk about ability, it's the ability, the capacity of countries to effectively utilize green finance. So, I mean, if you are talking about, let's say, providing green finance support for the micro, small, and medium enterprises in order to help them to produce and export organic goods, then, when you are talking about the capacity, you are talking about not only production, not only the productivity bit, but also competitiveness bit, and how they are able to fulfill all the requirements to be able to export to international markets. So all of that comes there, and for that, the ability becomes important. The fourth one is affordability. When we are talking about green finance, particularly loan component, how much it costs to obtain green finance becomes important. This is particularly in the case of banks and financial institutions. We'll hear more from our colleague from Nepal, NMB Bank later. But then bank and financial institutions normally do not separate between the green finance and other kinds of financing. Whenever they do, they provide like half a percentage point or 1 percentage point relief to the borrowers who borrow green finance. So that's probably not enough, but we'll hear more. The fifth one is the application, implying how effectively countries and firms are able to utilize the resources. Then finally, sixth one is the assessment. When I'm talking about assessment, it is about the impact assessment. It is about the evaluation. So all of that thing. And then, in ability, I missed one point, ability to access finance is also important. So these are the points that we would be covering today. And with these initial remarks, what I would like to do is to start the panel. And let's set some ground rules. After I invite the keynote speaker, for keynote speaker, I have provided 10 to 12 minutes. And we have colleagues there who would be showing that 2-minute sign there and 1-minute sign. That's the time to wrap up, right? 1-minute sign is the time to wrap up. So that's the first bit. And then there will be 2 rounds of questions. In the first round, I would be asking you, all of you, the panelists, to share your thoughts in 5 minutes. And then I will come back to you for the second round, and that would be 3 to 4 minutes. And then I will open the floor. Then I will invite panelists to respond and wrap up from their side. And finally, I would like to summarize and wrap up. And in meantime, if as keynote speaker, you want to respond to some of the questions, you would be able to do so as well, John. So let me start by inviting you, John Samuel, who is the head of Oxfam Asia, to deliver his keynote remarks.
Good morning to everyone. Dr. Nyan Adhikari and very distinguished panelists. friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Just before we end this session, around 50 people would have died due to climate crisis. As per the American security report, 400,000 people die because of climate crisis every year. And if you take the global humanitarian report of 2024, there they said 350,000 people died last year. So I just wanted to tell what does it mean. In South Asia, from 2019 to 2023, around 81 million people were affected because of the climate-induced drought, flood, and other stuff. So we are talking about, we are sitting on a time bomb, which is, it affects poorest of the poor. 65% of the South Asians live in rural area. And out of 65%, if you look at the South Asian gross domestic product, 18% is because of agriculture and farming, and 42% of the people are employed there. And these figures matters because this means what kind of responses our own governments do, what kind of responses global actors do, what kind of responses private sector do. As Jnana Adhikari said, green finance is about investment, debt, and grants, and public finance to ensure you have a sustainable environment and to also address the causes and consequences of climate change. And this has implications at the level of microeconomy and macroeconomy. The COP29, if you really look at after each COP, it's a story of broken promises. It's a story of rhetoric versus the reality. The $1.3 trillion were sort of demanded by the developing countries and less developed countries. And what is the offer? 300 billion. Now, this is, if you really look at the World Economic Forum report on quantifying change, they very clearly said by 2050, how many people will die, millions, around more than 12 million people will die. 8.5 million people due to flood. And if you really look at how heat wave and drought will create problem, and if you really look at how much money the government spent on COVID, it was $8.2 trillion. And now WHO says for climate-induced health crisis, we are spending only $132 billion. So these figures tell something about the story of broken promises. And COP29, Oxfam did a study and we said we need $18.9 trillion between now and 2030. The LDCs as well as middle income countries. And we don't have the money. And Southeast Asia and South Asia would require 1.3 trillion. Now the requirement is so high in terms of green financing. And green financing, let me start with national. I remember 10, 15 years ago when I was doing the budget analysis, we asked for the green budget. And the green budget of the public finance, and I think it's very important for all citizens to do what I call a social and public audit of our own budget and how much our own government allocate to these issues. Now, I come from Kerala. On July 30th, just because of cloudburst and landslide, the largest landslide recorded, in this part of the world. Around 400 people, 80 people died, 1,500 people lost houses. They are still living in what you call shelters. The government didn't even spend the money they collected. So there is an issue of accountability and governance at the root. It's one thing to make promises, and the story is that of broken promises. And when these 400,000 people die on the graveyard, it's the broken promises of every government. So we need to first make our own governments accountable. The economic governance needs to be seen along with environmental governance. And that's very important. It's about green cover and etc. The next is about the OECD countries. Now, OECD countries, even 0.7% of the, promised stuff. Then 6.5 trillion is pending. The countries which were agreed in 1970, about 0.7% for the ODA, they have not done it. They have not done it for poverty eradication, they have not done it for climate change. The last is, also I think it's important to look at the role of private sector. If you really look at the economic losses, and the World Economic Report very clearly say, in the quantifying data on 2050, it's huge, and the economic losses would affect the private sector, that affects the market. So private sector has an increasing role to play on what I call not only green technology, but they also have to contribute to the green financing, because it's not just government alone. Now, if you really look at the OECD wealthiest people, right? If you do a progressive taxation of 5%, you'll get 1.3 trillion. So it's not that, you have money. I mean, you have, Elon Musk is on the way to become a trillionaire, the first trillionaire, right? You have those people with lots of money. And I just wanted to also sum up by saying that as long as there is inequality and injustice, we are not going to solve this. Because people are poor not by accidents. People are poor because of the unequal distribution of land, habitat, technology, financial resources. So the unequal distribution of green finance is something which we need to do it. Where you spend that money, for what? And the second is what kind of technology we require it. And what's the kind of cost of technology? Who all get the green technology? The transition to green technology is just and equitable, where women will have a say, where the Dalits of South Asia will have a say, where the Adivasis will have a say, where the transgender will have a say. If we don't have that, so climate finance should not be by bureaucrats, for bureaucrats and of bureaucrats. Climate finance and green finance will have to be done in a way with a multi-stakeholder approach with private sector, multilateral actors including WTO, UN system, and academia, to the knowledge economy, and definitely the youth and women along with private sector. So you need a multi-stakeholder commitment for the green economy, green financing, and green financing needs to be seen from a micro part and a macroeconomic part. If it is not, we will be digging our own graves, because it will affect our food security. It will, as you know, in India and rest of the world, farmers are committing suicide. And we need to really see that, in a world of technology and services, if we know our, what I call small and medium scale farmers, our food sovereignty and food security also will be affected. So with this I am saying that, green finance is about the people and the planet, and it has to be done in an inclusive way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John, for that keynote speech where you not only talked about the broken promises, but also ended up with finally mentioning about the inclusive green finance. And you also touched upon the issue of technology. Technology and finance come together. And sometimes when you are talking about private investment, and if you are talking about the investment from the private sector, one of the reasons why the foreign direct investment is invited is to bring in technology as well. So, and then you also talked about the accountability of government. So we have somebody from government, but we are not asking him question about accountability. So we have Secretary Madhu Marasani, who is currently Secretary at the National Planning Commission. So Secretary Marasani, given your experience previously as Finance Secretary, as well as the board member of Nepal Rashtra Bank, which is the Central Bank of Nepal, and currently as the Secretary of the National Planning Commission, could you please let us know how governments can enhance regulatory framework to support the growth of green finance? You have 5 minutes, Secretary. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Okay, it's working. Good morning all, and thank you Ratnagarji, my good friend and moderator of this session. And first and foremost, I'd like to thank Saudi for organizing this very timely discussion, as the title itself says that we're discussing on green finance, especially in the conditions or circumstances that was created during the COP29 in Baku, right? I was listening to the news at that time that some days the negotiators from developing countries were calling that no deal is better than a bad deal. And at the latter part, they started compromising that some deal is better than no deal. So we are on that type of conundrum, But the thing is that we have so many things to do, because when we talk about green financing is not merely a financing, it's a financing for sustainable development. It's a financing for future, it's a financing for our people, planet, and of course for prosperity. So this is very critical issue that we are going to discuss, and we have to look at through the prism of keeping it aside and on a more forward-looking approach. So traditional way of thinking would not help. So we should be thinking beyond the box. Having said that, let me, when you asked Ratnagarji me about what governments should devise, how governments should devise the regulatory framework, I should say that first and foremost, government is the rule maker, rule setter. That means government creates institutions, right? So the institutions means the rules, regulations, policies, and strategies. And those rules, regulations, policies, and strategies should be inclusive, not extractive. That is very commonly also, profoundly, mentioned and also globally known. And lately, the Nobel laureates, Darin Acemoglu and Johnson, who also won the Nobel Prize on economics, because the poor countries are poor because of their poor institutions. So let's improve our institutions. That's the number one condition, and that should be inclusive institution. That's where we have to focus on. So how we make the inclusive institutions is that when we talk about the green regulatory framework for the green financing, then first and foremost is that we need to have a green finance taxonomy. So that clearly defines, the way, the pathways to obtain green finance in a smoother, in an efficient, in a transparent and accountable and fair manner. So green finance taxonomy is the number one important regulatory framework that I see. Apart from that, and also I'm happy to mention here that Nepal Rashtra Bank has recently, launched Nepal Green Finance Taxonomy. So I'm pretty sure that Nepal's bank and financing sector would be following that taxonomy, and that will lead them to finance for sustainable development. So I'm very much optimistic on that way. Number two is that align your development priorities towards sustainable development, policy and budgeting and planning as well. Nepal's 16th development plan, for example, one of the strategies out of 13 strategies is creating environment for green economy and also enabling space for green financing. That is one of the major strategies of 16th development plan. And through the budget of Nepal government's budget, we have started categorizing our budget whether it's climate sensitive, whether it's climate neutral, or it does not, whether climate sensitive is directly climate sensitive, indirectly climate sensitive, and climate neutral. That type of categorization we have done. And in regard to mobilizing international financing, public finance, we do have international development cooperation mobilization policy. We do have climate finance framework as well that government has issued. And there also we have clearly charted out how smoothly, how efficiently we can obtain the international climate finance. However, as Ratnakarji was saying that because of the complexity in accessing the global climate finance, we are very far behind to have access in those funds and to utilize that to really greening our economy. So I have already seen the 1 minute sign, and I have so many things to say, but thank you for letting me keep my points for the next round. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Parasani. The first point that you mentioned, I think resonates with many of us when you say institutions matter. Yes, they do matter. The second thing is that people do matter. People also matter, but the institution matter more than people. So you've also provided the ideas about the taxonomy and other things that are super important, and thank you for highlighting those aspects. And we have actually, that's one of the reasons why we invited the central bank governor tomorrow, this afternoon for the closing, and he will be speaking about the taxonomy as well. So he is our chief guest this afternoon. So with these words now, I would like to move to Famida. And Famida, since you have explored in your work the possibility of augmenting green finance through various sources and instruments beyond publicly funded mechanism, what are the instruments and sources of green finance that would be suitable for South Asia? Before you respond, I just want to mention one thing. So we need to congratulate Famida for being appointed to the Central Bank of Bangladesh Bank, as the board member recently. I think that happened recently, right? Congratulations to you. And you will probably have more to share, but let's focus on the instrument and sources of green finance that will be suitable for South Asia.
Thank you, Ratnakar, and good morning to everyone. I would like to divide my short comments into three parts. One is, of course, the sources first I would like to touch upon, though you have said that apart from public sources, what are the other instruments? But to understand the other instruments, I think you need to touch upon the public sources a little bit. Regarding the public sources, actually, the policy system itself is what matters. Particularly, the government can generate and mobilize resources through various policies. One is basically the macro and industrial policy, and within that, monetary policy through interest rate measures, through various liquidity operations and all these. And these can be channeled to the various green sectors, including energy, transport, and others. And the other important source is this fiscal and taxation tools, and also the budgetary measures, income tax, various value-added tax, property tax, and all these which can generate resources. And most important is that the government can also generate through various green public procurement, because the government can procure large-scale, long-term instruments or various measures. For example, the renewable electricity, then green buildings and all this. The other source is, of course, discounted credits, green credit, which can be provided to particular sectors which are not very strong enough to generate resources, for example, these SME sectors. And the environmental policies, very quickly, I'll just shift away from that, because the instruments you have asked me to focus on from the private sources, very basically. So the whole operation of the green financial system depends on the financial instruments in the market which are available. I wouldn't go into the details, but some of the examples are, again, the green credit through various commercial banks, the deposits that can be allocated towards various green projects, green insurance, which is particularly important for adaptation in the low-income countries and these in South Asian countries, particularly because it manages the long-term risks for various disasters, natural disasters, flood, storm, etc. The other source is green bond. This is particularly important also because it is a direct financial instrument which is issued by government or international organizations or even financial institutions to support green projects at a discounted or low interest rate. Then also green venture capital funds or equity investments. That is also very important for the small and medium enterprises which just started to work on green projects. The other source can be debt for nature, or what is called climate swaps. This is when a donor cancels or reduces the debt stock for a country in condition that saved money would be used for climate projects or green projects. So these are some of the important ones. And the challenges, the third part is the challenges, basically. And you touched upon 6 indicators. I would mention a few which covers this availability, adaptability, accessibility, all this. The one important thing is that when you talk about commercial sources, many countries within South Asia, barring 1 or 2 countries, the banking system is very vulnerable with poor assets, bad loans. In many countries, particularly I can talk about my own country, that banking sector is grappling with bad loans, and it is not in a shape to support the green projects, apart from a few banks. Many of them do not also comply with various requirements, for example, Basel III requirements and all these. The other issue is that limitation is that the underdeveloped capital market. So there are, very limited institutional, investors. Government is the major investor, and it is also very narrow. There is limited, green bonds and all. In some countries there are, of course, India has. In Bangladesh we have, small scale 2 private sector green bonds which has been initiated. So the third issue is that the strategic green finance framework, which is absent mostly. So Mr. Secretary has mentioned about the taxonomy and all this. So the development and synchronization of a green financial strategy, this is very important because we have to know the requirement of green finance and also synchronize the financial sources with the financial policies and define the role of each financial market types. And the last but not the least is the limited capacity, which you also, Ratnakar, touched upon in your initial remarks, that the lack of common understanding of the scope of green finance, that is not yet clear across stakeholders. I think at this point I will stop. Maybe later I can touch upon a bit more. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A round of applause to Fahmida. That was Fahmida Khatun, the Executive Director of Center for Policy Dialogue, the premier think tank in Bangladesh. So And you touched upon very, very important issues, including green insurance and green bond, and the challenges that you highlighted, spot on. And some of them were actually, I tried to cover them. I will probably have to improve next time around to include these also. Man, thank you so much. Can I move to now Mr. Radhesh Pant, who is the chairman of BROC and Company, representing private sector. Since your organization has done a commendable work on green and sustainable development areas, including sustainable energy and transportation that I know of, could you please explain how you have been able to mobilize green finance for implementing these initiatives?
Thank you very much, Dr. Ratnakarji. Basically, we have actually, we cannot be so proud that, we have mobilized and utilized green finance to a large portion, so to speak. With our project, Urja Nepal project, we have been able to work with private sector companies, clean tech companies, to establish about 23 EV charging vehicle stations around Nepal, throughout the Tarai, from I believe from Tarai to the eastern part. Basically, this really helped. We can see the impact. Initially, the impact was not seen. This really helped the fast-track the implementation. And I believe NEA is also we work with NEA as well, and they're keen in expanding that. And not only that, it also helped as a viability gap funding, along with the banks. They could get some kind of loan from the banks. Apart from this, we also work with the grassroots and electric cooking. This is again a grant. We provide a grant to basically the farmers, the women-led institutions at the very low level, different rural areas of Nepal, and that also helped them gain, some kind of financing opportunities from the cooperatives around them. We piloted efficiency solutions, essentially worked with industries such as the cold storage and dairy, and by promoting this, innovative model, and it really cut their operational cost and reduce their industrial emission and so forth. So now we work very closely with NEA, and basically with NEA we're looking into hydropower projects that have strong potential to green financing. And as a matter of fact, we're working with a large project right now with them, and also sensitizing the NEA, in what this, how they can streamline their processes in order to accommodate, educate, enhance capacities of their staff, and also, to access these financing. And the other work that we're doing right now is working with the GSF accredited entities. Currently, we're working with AEPC, the agriculture, not agriculture, sorry, alternate energy institution, and then also with the bank, Nepal Investment Mega Bank. So what we're doing is we're working with the private sectors to design projects for which they can get, hopefully, funding from the GCF. And last but not the least, we are partnering with the with the Kathmandu University. As you must have read in the news, Kathmandu University has made significant studies in green hydrogen research. So we're trying to pilot a project that would help the transport industry, and that would actually ultimately that we could commercialize that in other parts of the country as well. So having said that, there's a lot more to do. If I look at the Mr. Secretary, the keynote speaker, and my other the
Panelists from CPD.
panelists, What I can say out of experience is that, it's not really about the policies. Policies, we can always make the policies. I liked what our keynote speaker said. I think there has to be buy-in from each and every stakeholders. It's not just the government coming out with a policy. It's not just the private sector. Actually, people like you and I, people like public need to understand that if we focus on climate, if we focus on green financing, then basically it's not just for us. It's for generations after us. The benefit cannot be reaped just immediately, right? I mean, financing does not mean you get the finance from the bank and then that's the end of the story. So that sort of patience, that sort of long-term strategy, I think, needs to be brought out in all the stakeholders. And secondly, I think it's not about the money, and we always talk about green financing, this fund, that fund. There is enough money. I think we need to make sure that these projects make sense in the longer term. Make sure that it produces value. There is value for money, and then once that is done, I think all this green financing could be successful. And third, I think, especially in South Asia, we need to just come together. There are so many large-scale infrastructure projects that could actually, if at the political level, if the country leaders could actually go out and look for funding, I think that shouldn't be a problem. Thank you.
Thank you. A round of applause. Rajeshji, you touched upon very important points, and particularly the last point that you mentioned is very close to our heart. Regional cooperation is super important for regional infrastructure project, and how to mobilize climate finance for regional public good is something that we haven't thought through, and this is one of the things where we need to do additional research. The other important point that you highlighted is that the kind of work that you're doing to build capacity of the private sector to design bankable projects that they could then apply for funding to various international institutions, including Green Climate Fund. It's very, very important point. And staying with the private sector now, I would like to invite Ms. Pranisha Shrestha, who is the head of brand and marketing of NMB Bank. From what I understand, Pranisha, your bank has been at the forefront of providing green finance to various enterprises. What we would like to know is, in which sectors have your bank extended green financing support? What has worked and why? Please feel free to share any example of best practices that could be replicated elsewhere in South Asia. Over to you, Pranisha.
Thank you, Dr. Ratnagar. Thank you, Swati. As a brand expert, I think I'll take a credit on this, that NMB Bank has positioned ourselves as a leading sustainable bank, and that's why I think I'm here. Sustainability has always been our core strategic priority for NMB Bank, and driving our commitment to the green financing. As a transformative, I'll say that force for the economic growth and environment resilience. And as our speaker John also has, as a keynote speaker, has always said that NMB vision has always been in line with the people and planet first, and then the profit comes after that. Our primary focus has always been including the renewable energy projects like hydropower, utility scale power, solar, complemented by the investments into energy productions, biomass, and electric vehicles to add on. So I would reiterate myself as NMB Bank is one of the mostly one of the leading bank on financing the hydro projects. What has worked for us is we are the first bank to develop the in-house expertise, as we have seen in the past two sessions talking about the knowledge gap and how we are financing those kinds of projects. So we have specialized in-house experts, we hire hydro engineers, we have ENS experts in-house. I think that enables us to offer more comprehensive advisory and financial support to our clients. Additionally, we are also expanding our investments on the rooftop solars, a project for the commercial and the institutional sector also. One of the benchmark that NMB Bank has done on the Waste to Energy is we have done our exercise, and we support blended finance, and one of the benchmark that we have created with the combination with the project with the municipal waste to energy, waste to management with the renewable energy production. So another on the retail front side, we have been prioritizing our EVs, financing the developing infrastructures like charging stations. As we are, we have just recently also want to share the few, we have been awarded recently for the web, for the special gender mentioned on the gender inclusive, and Nepal's been the first one to get that award on the gender inclusion workforce place. We have been encouraging the women EV owners on the retail front so that it aligns with our inclusion initiatives. So what we have worked in NMB Bank is our unwavering commitment towards the sustainability, which our vision in lines with the Nepal's net zero emissions goals also. As I've already talked about, we have a robust expertise and the technical support, which ensures that project meet rigorous green financing framework, as well as supported by our environmental social due diligence. We are only one of the member of the Global Alliance Banking of Values, which help us to adopt the best global practices, and such as green bond principles, as well as the accounting standards under the PCAF. We emphasis on the transparency, and another one of the leading by example is that we are the only bank, we are the first bank to disclose the carbon footprint in Nepal. And I think that has fostered the investors' confidence among us, and we also unlock the green, global green investment opportunities for NMB Bank. So, as we said, going on saying that we have a long way to go, but by fostering the renewable energies, hydropower financing, EV adoptions, I think we are not only contributing to the Nepal's sustainable goals, but we are also inspiring other financial institutions to across the South Asia to integrate the sustainability as our core strategies and paving the way for a greener and more resilient future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for touching upon these aspects of your work, including inclusive green finance. Not only green finance, but also inclusive green finance, and that is important. Now let me round up this session by going to Sanjay Vasist, who is the director of KANSA. KANSA, many of you must have heard of this, Climate Action Network, South Asia. So Sanjay, I mean, again, coming back to the point that John made in relation to the broken promises and all of that, let's revisit that point again. From your perspective, how do you evaluate the outcome of COP29, both in terms of net collective quantified goal, NCQG, and carbon market?
Thank you. Ratnagar, how much time do I have, Ratnagar?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, and I don't have to look in that direction. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ratnagar. And I think I'll start with, the two remarks that John made about green finance required for transformation. And for CAN South Asia, our advocacy efforts are that how do we visualize transformation? Of course, carbon-free future, resilience to people, no one is left behind, including those who are working in fossil fuel sectors, and of course, equal opportunities for all, for future generations. So, and John also gave a very good comparison of 8.1 trillion for COVID versus 132 billion for climate action. And I think that's the reality. And that also shows that actually brought onus on COP process, that unless we have climate finance agreed, the ambition cannot be unlocked, neither in mitigation nor in adaptation or loss and damage. And that's why we termed it as a COP for finance. So this, everyone started talking about it 1 year back after Dubai COP, that this is going to be a finance COP. Like next year, Brazil COP is being seen as a nature COP because it's in Belém. So let's look at the, how the posturing was and countries' expectations were. India talked about 1 trillion USD required for finance as a new climate quantified goal. And then Arab world said 2 trillion required. So there were various numbers that came in. And CSOs like CAN, we took a position that 1 trillion in grants. And we also demanded 5 trillion climate debt to be repatriated. But then the reality was completely different. EU came without numbers. There was no number with them. And primarily because domestically they have challenges. Germany, which is a progressive country, the government is in minority. The elections are due in February next year. We also know Trump has come in power. Anytime after 20th January, he may withdraw from Paris Agreement or UNFCCC. That's also a reality. Diplomatically, Azerbaijan presidency was not very good in terms of relations with countries. India, no good relations, because India is seen as supporting Armenia. Those feelings were very evident in the negotiations also. They also had a very bad relations with France. In fact, France energy minister cancelled her visit in the first week because of some statement made by a senior politician in Azerbaijan. Argentinian delegation went back. That's not because of Azerbaijan diplomacy, but more because Trump spoke to the Argentinian president, and in first week they called Argentinian negotiators back. So these were the political realities, and on top of it, the cherry on top was that president of Azerbaijan said in first week that oil is gift from God. So that's in the first week when climate negotiations are going, and you are heading and you are trying to bring everybody on table. So certainly political reality was not very good, and the agenda was huge. Global stock take, because global stock take needed to give directions to nationally determined contribution, which will be submitted next year. So direction has come, no doubt about it. But rather than March, as anticipated, we are going to receive revised NDCs not before September, October next year. And then we would know whether we are still heading towards 2.7 degree temperature goal compared to what we need, 1.5 degree, or the gap is reduced. I have my doubts. Carbon market rule book has been agreed with some rules, and I think within 2 years, you will see credits moving from one country to another. NCQG, only 300 billion has been agreed with various sources, no grant, and this is versus 1.3 trillion, and that too by 2035. So Paris Agreement said from 2025 onwards, 100 billion will be floor and will go up, but that didn't happen. And then loss and damage fund is operational, but it has only $700 million. So for developing countries, it's a win. We have a fund, but that fund is empty. Let's not forget that. That's the reality we are living in. Global stock take, they kept on fighting with or without finance. That's fine. I think this negotiation will continue. So in a very crux, and my concluding remarks on this is Paris Agreement has not been honored, for sure. And there's going to be a weakened NDCs from all developing countries. They'll say, if we don't get money from international processes, why should we commit anything to you? That will be a historic responsibilities out of window. We are talking about future, not about past. CBDR and RC is in spirit, but negotiations are all about legal text. And loss and damage we are negotiating, and Paris Agreement already says without liability and without any compensation. So in my view, Member Secretary Sir said no deal or something, or in my view, it should have been no deal, because then we don't have to recover from damage and make progress in the next COP.
Thank you. You touched upon the loss and damage also. I wanted to come back to that on the second round, but you managed to touch that bit also. So I have so many distinguished audience, who might want to ask questions, because We have people such as, Abhijit Suleri, who has been working on climate finance for a long time. Mr. Pradeep Mehta, who is one of the founders of SWATI, is also here, prominent personality. Mustafi Jur, Brendan, and all of them. I would like to recognize all of you. Rupa out there. So you may have questions, but then bear with us for 20 more minutes. We go to the second round, and then come back to you again, come back to you after that. So let me go back to Secretary Marasini. Do you like to share some best practices, whether in Nepal or in South Asia?
Well, thank you once again, Ratnakarji. So in regard to mobilizing green financing, the best practices, let me bring some examples, some best practices from Nepal. The number one best practice that I would like to share with you is that the public-private partnership model in hydropower generation in Nepal. Though we overlook, but until recently, we have been through 18 hours of load shedding, no power. That means no industry, that means no economy, right? But since the day we opened up the private financing in hydropower generation, that changed the whole gamut of greening our energy and also modernizing our economy and also transforming our economy towards green economy. So that's first and foremost a very important example, and that not only for Nepal, we have started to exporting the green energy to India and lately to Bangladesh as well. So that is one of the best examples that I would like to share here. And number second, not only domestically, but with the international development partners as well, we have signed in 2021 the green initiatives, green, resilient, and inclusive development initiatives with our development partners. At that time, there were 16 partners, including World Bank, ADB, and others. That the financing from those multilateral agencies would be directed towards green economy, greening our economy, and also protecting our vulnerable groups. Because Nepal is one of the most vulnerable countries when we talk about climate change, in effects of climate change. Just recently we had this rain bomb, I would like to call rain bomb, that swept away our infrastructures, and also, 250 precious lives were drowned and dead only because of the 2 days rainfall. How vulnerable is our condition in regard to climate change, that you can simply, that example is enough. And third one is we have also started country-to-country carbon trading. In Baku, Nepal has signed an agreement with Sweden that, on the carbon trading, country-to-country carbon trading. But not only with the country-to-country, we have also signed with the World Bank. And also, I myself have signed during the Glasgow COP with the LEAF initiatives, where the Amazon, Google, like the private firms were also, purchasing the carbon stock from Nepal. So there are so many, good examples from Nepal and also from the region that other countries in South Asia can also learn from us. And as you said, the green financing taxonomy that Nepal Central Bank, the Nepal Rashtra Bank has recently launched is not only on climate financing, it's of course on green financing. So it goes beyond financing adaptation and mitigation, but also it includes financing for conservation, financing for air pollution control and beyond. So these are some examples, I think.
Thank you, brilliant example. Thank you so much. Now, can I go to Famida? The second question that I had for you is that, what are the non-public sources of financing that are available? Apart from the bank and financial institution, and then, including blended finance and impact investment. Various kinds of innovative financing instrument can be utilized for climate, mitigation, adaptation, as well as, using climate financing or green financing as an instrument for propelling growth, economic growth. So those are there. And then given the fact that you have enormous experience in these areas, could you please shed light on some of these?
Thank you, Ratnakar. Innovative blended finance is one of the important sources of climate finance or green finance these days. This is basically a combination of concessional public money with private and philanthropic money. This is important source because of a few factors. First is that countries like South Asian countries and many other poor countries, they are highly vulnerable to the impact of climate change, but they have limited resources, limited fiscal space, and many of them are also into debt, both domestic and external debt. And also the limited fiscal space, as I've mentioned. So from that point of view, so far the multilateral development banks and financial institutions, they have been playing the role of the major guarantor or public sources, which catalyze the private sector funds or the philanthropic sources. And this is important sources, but it also has some caveats. It can only work efficiently if there are certain conditionalities or challenges are met. I would mention a few here. First is that to have a conducive regulatory and institutional framework. It should be investor-friendly and development-friendly, transparent, effective, and with monitoring and assessment mechanism inbuilt in the instrument. The second one is that the private sector mobilization strategy and action plan. The private sector has to have also a plan, because in many countries the private sector doesn't have specific plan for having investment for green activities. The third one is that well-prepared bankable projects with high development impact, which you have also mentioned at the beginning, that many projects do not have the commercial viabilities, and the private sector and are not also very competent to prepare any projects, or those who want to invest, investors are not prepared to make bankable projects. So the private sector or the banks are not very interested to fund those. The fourth one is that the financial scalability, because given the enormity of the requirement of climate funds, the amount has to be really substantive. But in many cases, in smaller countries, there is no scalability of funds. And the transparency of the fund is very important, and the governance of this. So if we have all these in place, the blended finance can work quite well. Impact investment is another, it can be for various environmental projects, green projects, and various other social sectors as well. I would like to, I would like to also touch upon the issue of the experience of blended finance, because this is not a silver bullet. I will give two examples which are widely referred to, that where the blended finance miserably failed. One is the example of South Africa's Just Energy Transition Partnership, which was announced in 2021 in COP26 in Glasgow. And the initial amount was $8.5 billion for a period of 2023 to 2027, but later on it has increased to 98 billion. The other one is the scaling solar program in Zambia by International Finance Corporation in 2015. What has happened in both the cases is that these projects became high-cost projects, and there was lack of transparency, and the grant element of those funds were very limited. In fact, in case of South Africa, there was this South Africa's Presidential Climate Commission. Their observation was this. And in case of Zambia also, a think tank called Energy for Growth Hub, they undertook a study which also found similar experiences. And in fact, they found that these projects were implemented even at a time when the country was in high debt. So they continued to implement, and then it was not very useful. It did not serve the objective of greening and objective of economic welfare of the people.
Thank you so much. And you touched upon a very important issue, and that is scalability. So talking about scalability, Radeshji, I want to ask you this question. What are the possible avenues for green financing in South Asian countries that could help to scale up the kind of initiative that you are undertaking?
No, first of all, I think as the Secretary mentioned and also Dr. Khatun mentioned, I think there's a lot of opportunity in the public-private partnership projects whereby the government can bring in or attract concessional finance, and the rest could be done by the private sector, the banks and probably international banks as well, because that sort of will reduce the risk of the project. So, for example, currently we're talking about financing the large-scale hydropower projects of Nepal through on a PPP model, right? It has to be, I think, because when the private sector gets into these projects, it's all about profits or commercially viability for them. So they will make these projects happen, provided you sort of kick in some viability funding in terms of concessional finance or so forth. So that's one. The second, as again Dr. Khatun had brought, is about the bonds and debt instruments. Unfortunately, in Nepal, the debt market, the capital market is, I would say, even non-existent. It's very difficult to raise capital in the stock market. But again, that can be had, I think, if we focus more on the capital market, and hopefully capital market will mature as it has in India. So that's the second thing. Third is also the leveraging, all these international climate funds, as we talked about the Green Climate Fund, the Global Environment Fund, the Climate Investment Funds, whereby I think, and I personally feel in order to get to these people, the government has to take a leadership role, because I think, first of all, especially for Nepal, I can speak for Nepal, is that the private sector is active and it's there, but the size of the private sector is not as so big that they could access these funds directly. So that's, the other is, again, the bilateral, multilateral, as we talked about, there are projects coming up, the Green Growth Nepal project of the British Embassy. I mean, they are going to focus on, some kind of grant. Their focus is on green projects of Nepal, to develop these Nepal, to help government, or the investment board for that matter, to develop these projects. And another important, I think I pointed out, is the regional cooperation platform. We have these, regional ways, and I think it's high time we really focus on regional strength. We've been talking about this for years and years, for decades now, and as you can see, Europe has become very strong. In other parts of the world also, the regions are doing really well because they're working among themselves. So the SAARC Development Fund, maybe it's, or the BIMSTEC, these are some of the ways to promote these green projects. And the other point also is carbon financing, credit, and markets. I think we really, in Nepal have not really looked into it, so to speak, How can we engage in international carbon markets? Probably, again, effort from the private sector and the government, in order because we have a lot of opportunity. We say that Nepal is a very natural resource, country, and so, but we really haven't, I don't think we have gone through these areas. And finally, also is the, alignment. I think in order to get these investments, that there's got to be national policy alignment between various policies, and policies need to be implementable. I mean, I always stress that just having a policy just to get you across the first door is not enough. I think these are, again, sustainable. You're working for a long term, so for that, the policies also need to have that sort of tone from the government to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I would like to go to Pranisha. Pranisha, do you face any challenges in terms of lending? I mean, lending is probably simple, but do you face any regulatory, repayment, or impact assessment-related challenges while providing green finance to your clients?
Definitely. We face a lot of challenges, but to sum up some, because Nepal regulatory framework regarding the sustainable practices on green financing is in very primitive stage. To bring that understanding to the private sectors and to bring that out space, it always delays, as well as the cost overruns over that. And there are a lot of challenges what we are facing, and how we are doing to overcome it is the collaboration with the regulators. We actively engage with the national regulators, where we advocate for the timely amendments and what are the hurdles that we are facing as an institution, financial institution. Rightly point out, as you said, that we always overlook the repayment and the recovery challenges that we have to go through to the renewable energy projects, because there is off-grid renewable projects which is awfully located in the most of the remote areas, right? So how we are overcoming is that we have a dedicated team with the field monitoring system, where we have a regular site visits, and we can oversee the project's progresses and ensure the repayment viability. As well as we are also focusing on making them more practical on the digital platform, where that is also one of the key leveraging factor, as well as the digital tool, so that we can simplify the repayment processes for the borrowers in the remote areas. Another, I think, Fahmida has also rightly pointed out the impact assessment. While measuring the GHG offset, maybe the environmental impact, client awareness towards it is very, very limited. And to reduce it, what we are doing as a bank is to make them more aware about it. We give trainings. We have our training going on the disaster that we have been talking about in the past 2 days. Also, we are giving trainings on the BCP planning, how we can do in the initial phase of time, so that it benefits both to the bank as well as the client awareness factor. Another is, I think our keynote speaker also focused on the transparency and the disclosure mounted, so that we can foster them. And that is something that we really lack in Nepalese financial institution. We have started with making an example of it, but there is a very long way to go to the other financial institution. So that transparency and I think the disclosure will attract, as I've already said in my previous note, that it helps to foster and attract the global investors on the green financing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can we now? I want to go back to Sanjay now, to wrap up this bit, the second round. And you already mentioned about the loss and damage. This is extremely important for us, as I highlighted in my initial welcome remarks also. So 750 million people displaced from climate-related hazards, and and disasters. So, I mean, this is a reason we are actually sitting at the kind of a, it's a ticking time bomb, I would say, right? It is. So given that, loss and damage is super important. So given what has happened so far, what is the way forward from your perspective? What is the way forward?
Yeah, and I'll also expand with 3 points on climate finance later on, Ratnagar, if that's allowed. So loss and damage, I think as of now, in Paris Agreement, loss and damage was mentioned as adaptation, within adaptation pillar. That was a compromise that was made between developed and developing country. But then loss and damage fund was created in Glasgow and then later on in Sharm el-Sheikh and Dubai also. So fund is operational now. There is a board that has been put in place, secretariat put in place, headquarters secretariat will be in Manila, Philippines, and it only has 700 million. So it's a shallow institution as of now. It doesn't have money. And there's a Warsaw International Mechanism which will keep on guiding, which will keep on basically working with loss and damage to frame methodologies on how loss and damage fund need to be distributed. And they are certainly following Green Climate Fund model for sure. So that's the one aspect. In terms of way forward, I don't think we should wait for loss and damage fund to deliver. Even if they deliver, they'll give very less money. Compared to mitigation, in my opinion, adaptation need less money, mitigation need more money, loss and damage need much more money because it's about recreating the losses that has happened to the ecosystem. And keeping that in mind, I think within South Asia, and I would say all countries, we should work on loss and damage frameworks for our own countries. Identify loss and damage hotspots, and let's work on that. What can be recovered through intensive adaptation measures, what can be done through reconstruction or alternatives in order to rehabilitate people. Can South Asia is working on climate-induced migration, and along with all partners, we are pitching for legal and social protection for migrants. They deserve that. They don't want to migrate, they are forced to migrate. So that's why we call them, because of push factors, they have migrated. Now coming on climate finance, I think I'm really happy to see private sector banks from South Asia really getting into climate space and identifying their role and the instruments you all are working on, because that is required. Because in NCQG deal in Baku, it's more about investment approach rather than grant approach. So investment approach would mean, and I fear, and this is, I'm talking among all trade experts and market experts here, I fear that this may be a way for developed countries to bypass trade barriers and find new markets. And that's why our CBM comes in place, and that is important. So let's be aware about that possibility and keep a watch, and that is important. Another is quality or contributors base. Who should contribute to NCQG? Developing country says, no, apply principles of UNFCCC, we are not liable, you are liable. But then the backdoor entry is through multinational development banks, where India, China also contributes, and the developing countries also contribute. So let's be aware about that, how NCQG game is being played. So loss and damage and NCQG.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Really good one there. And so with these, now we've concluded our questions to the panelists, and then intervention from the panelists. Now I would like to invite Professor Mustafizur Rahman. Then I'll come to you, Abid and Pradeep, and Dr. Pandey. So 5. Some female participant also. I mean, I want to be a bit gender balanced. No, I'll come to you, Mr. Tuladar. Yeah.
Okay, Ratnakar, thank you very much. Really fascinating discussion. I think Sanjay mentioned it, and then Mr. Marcini also gave some very good examples. I'm talking about carbon credit. My question is to Famida. Dr. Famida, we heard from Mr. Marcini that Nepal has taken a number of initiatives with regard to carbon credit. What is the case with regard to Bangladesh? Have we taken any initiative in this regard? Thank you.
The next one is Abid. And then Mr. Abid Suleri. then Pradeep Mehta, then Mr. Tuladar.
Thank you, and my gratitude to all the panelists for highlighting various aspects of climate finance. As a member of COP29 International Advisory Committee, I just wanted to add a couple of points here. I know we are throwing different pieces of jigsaw puzzle. I think one very important thing that didn't got much of our attention is not only the quantity of finance, it's quality of finance as well. And when we say quality of finance, we need to understand whether the finance that is being promised, it's the pledges, grants, soft loan, hard loan, and at time climate finance and debt-affected countries, they find themselves in a vicious cycle. They cannot invest in their climate resilience because of their debt. And when a climate change impact hits them hard, they have to borrow more to mitigate the impact of it. And that vicious cycle keeps on haunting their resilience and their capacity. And in our negotiations, we need to discuss this. The second important point is that COP29 was significant in the terms that this time the discussion was not on emission or on the degree centigrades. It's about the finance which is required to contain or to reduce those emissions, which means that now onwards, climate negotiation would not only be a scientific negotiation, it would be a financial negotiation as well. And if it's a financial negotiation, we need to keep in mind the impact of inflation. The amount that was promised to the international community in 2009, $100 billion number, which got materialized only in 2022, due to the inflationary impact, the reduction in purchasing price, that $100 billion had reduced to $60 billion. Today, when we are talking of $300 billion, if one keeps in mind the 2.35% inflation, average inflation in US for last 15 years, that would be reduced by 22% by the time it gets realized. So when the countries, they are producing their NDCs, I think they also they are demanding for climate finance. They need to keep in mind the inflationary impact while negotiating a number. And very final point, because I was closely involved in the negotiation as well as with the presidency, the number 250 to $300 billion was there from the day first. The presidency was trying EU to disclose this number, and EU negotiators, they were reluctant to disclose it. Even one of the press conferences that we did in the Kansa, I tried to reveal that number. One journalist asked me, and I said the deal would be around 250 to $300 billion. So they were deliberately trying to not to reveal this number till last day, so that developing countries, they should, the LDCs, they should get fatigued from negotiation and they should agree on whatever is being promised. And the very final point, Sanjay, I would beg to disagree with you. I think a deal is better than a bad deal. You see, we kept on criticizing SARC for a long time, asking it that it's a vestigial organization, it's a dysfunctional organization. We never realized the importance of it, and today, well, it is dysfunctional. Now we regret a photo op where at least the heads of government and heads of states, they could meet every year or whatever the frequency they decided to agree to disagree. Now, if there is no COP, or if we say that COP should be a failed process, we are actually distrusting on multilateralism, and the vacuum that would be created by rejecting forums like COP, that would push us to a unilateralism where by already with this aspects of Trump administration, we will have to negotiate very hard. So I am in favor of a deal, no matter how bad it is. I think we need to do our homework right so that we can keep on claiming the inches that we can. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was my friend Abid Suleri, the Executive Director of Sustainable Development Policy Institute. Now, over to you, Mr. Pradeep Mehta.
Thank you, Ratnakar. Thank you very much. And a very interesting discussion. Very grateful to have heard. We heard two different levels of issues in terms of green finance. One is the political, the international politics, and the other is what each of you are doing at a micro level in terms of. Now, we have to look at a kind of a mix of that. But before that, I think there are two preambular points which I must make, carrying on from what Abid stated. That we have to understand the fact that multilateralism is at peril. If you look at it, in every which way, WTO itself is, limping. One of the best multilateral institutions, I will not get into that detail because it's not really a trade discussion, but the fact is that in the context of multilateralism being the way it is, I think what Abid makes a point is something which I strongly support, that whatever the instruments we have, and we should try to keep them alive and kicking. Secondly, and most importantly, what I find in these discussions on climate finance, climate issue, is the lack of discussion on biodiversity. It's an equal cry for funding, and loss and damage and salvaging and all that similar kind of thing. And let's not forget that climate and biodiversity are synoptic. You cannot ignore one and the other, especially in a country like Nepal, for example. We heard yesterday as to the kind of biodiversity risks that you run in terms of the hydro projects, for example. So whatever environmental projects we take up, we'll have to also understand as to what the risks are in terms of biodiversity. Now, Ratnakar, you'll give me 3 minutes. Now, what we are doing now, this is an important thing that we've done a lot of work on this for a long time. There is already a UN panel which has come out with a study headed by Nick Stern and Amar Bhattacharya, among others, Vera Songwe, and so on, which has said very clearly that the world requires about $7 to $9 trillion over the next 10 years or 15 years in order to salvage the kind of, in terms of the loss and damage that you're talking about. So, Sanjay, I'm glad that you distinguished between mitigation, adaptation, and the loss and damage. So, I'm looking only at loss and damage alone, because without the kind of funding, you will not be able to carry out mitigation or adaptation procedures. Now, what we have suggested is that the governments are shy. You cannot depend upon the tax contributions from governments. So we have to have an innovative finance model. One was being mentioned here, blended finance, for example. There are at least 10 ways that we think we can go ahead. One, for example, which came up at the G20 meeting in Europe in 2010, to levy the Tobin tax. Those of you might have heard of Tobin tax. There was a proposal made by a very famous American economist that you levy 0.1% on all financial transactions happening globally, and you should be able to raise at least about $700 billion a year. Subject to inflation, of course, we'll have to see as to how it can be done. Now, various ways which can be done is we've got a literature here in terms of the campaign that we are running. That if you look at both, you need funding for both salvaging climate and biodiversity losses. One is this Tobin tax for green bonds, which has been spoken, carbon credits, what has been already spoken, sustainability-linked loans, this is something new, debt-to-nature swaps, which has been mentioned already, crowdsourcing, we're not looking at crowdsourcing. Crowdsourcing can generate a lot of funding. Philanthropic funds, look at the health, for example, Gates Foundation is funding a lot. That can, then blended finance, we spoke about PPPs, etc., and sort of various ways as to how this can be approached. And finally, Ratnakar, to conclude, and a very important point was made here in this thing, is the issue about institutions. To do all this, you require good institutions in place, not only nationally, but regionally and globally. You've already pointed out about the failure of SARC, Abid has pointed out. So what are the alternate ways we can think about? One is, of course, what we talk about is this kind of civil society and track 1.5 approach to many of these issues. And that is what this platform should be able to spring forward, that where institutions are failing, multilateralism is failing, how do you see to it that progress happens?
Thank you. Thank
And
you, sir.
finally, the last point, I think what we have not spoken about, which is again a part of SDGs, is sustainable production and consumption. We'll have to talk about, how do we reduce our consumption in order to lower the emissions. Thank you.
Precisely. Thank you so much for those points. Over to you, Mr. Tulada.
Thank you very much. That's been a very enriching session. Thank you very much. And I'm Sharat Tuladar from a bank in Nepal. And I would like to touch upon some additional aspect to green financing. First and foremost, in Nepal and emerging economies in Southeast Asia, probably. South Asia, I would say that impact investors are not there in the country. So where do we get the funds from? We need to rely on the global market. And then we talk about green financing and climate financing, then energy transition is one big aspect to it. So what I'm trying to focus on is there are various stakeholders to this. So it would be the private sector, it would be public and public sector, then it would be the government, and probably we have the international partners as well to this entire equation. So when we talk about investments and green financing, then hydropower is one big mode of energy transition for Nepal. So how much have we been encashing on that, and has the partners or the stakeholders empowered green hydropower in Nepal? Because the international investors do not consider hydropower as a clean energy because of its ESG repercussions. So we need to advocate for that as well. And then when we talk about climate mitigation and adaptation, and then again the funding gap that we see in the country, say for example for hydropower, if we look at 2030 aspirations of the country, then we need around $7 to $8 billion as investment. So like I mentioned, it is not available within the country. If we even if we take entire financial institution in the country, probably we'll collect approximately $4 billion for investment in hydropower. That is, if we do not invest anywhere else. Then we need to rely on international investors to come into Nepal and invest in clean energy that Nepal has. So to prepare for that, we need to ensure that one of the major stakeholders plays some role in facilitating the private sector, which is one big player that, as one of the panelists have already mentioned, that private sector is the key player. So how do we make that a business case for the private sector? So how do we make hydropower energy an investment for international investors in Nepal? So that's something that we need to look into, because the budget gap that we are seeing, even in the NDCs and NAB that the country has, approximately 80% of the budget is yet to be sourced, and it is not available as per the budget. So we have adequate amount of policies in place. Even if we talk about climate financing, then we have probably 8 to 10 policies already in place in the country. What we need is the government to see that how can we facilitate the private sector or take Nepal to a level that international investments come into the country, and probably the international partners that we have take a step forward and support the private sector as well. And apart from supporting us in the, it's for the emerging economies, apart from supporting in the policy level, I think they need to support on the implementation side of the green financing and climate finance as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tulada, for your intervention. Thank you so much. Dr. Pandey.
Thank you, Dr. Adhikari. I have few concerns, and maybe panelist or moderator or keynote speaker may respond. My first concern is this climate crisis is not gender neutral. And available literature indicates that women and children are 14 times more likely to die than men. And again, I mean, is looking at this new collective quantified goals. In that document, I didn't find word gender. It mentions one time woman, but I didn't find the word gender. So here my concern is, how can we ensure gender sensitive climate finance delivery pathways? That is on my concern. And another concern is growing geopolitical and geoeconomic disruption and non-climate denier as President of the US. How optimistic are you on global partnership on climate finance? These are two my concerns. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Can we go to Rupa? Or if you are not ready, I can ask somebody else.
Okay, so actually part of my question was already in a comment by Pradeep, which was, when we talk about investment, the general perception that one has is of the traditional form of investment, but there are so many other forms of financing, innovative financing. So impact investment is what was in my mind, and especially looking at the smaller entities. Again, I bring back the conversation to MSMEs. We're not looking always at FDI and resilient infrastructure, etc. So what are the countries doing on their side in terms of creating the enabling regulatory frameworks and legislation and so on to enable the smaller entities to actually access this kind of innovative financing? And second is, how are you capacitating the MSMEs themselves to be able to access this investment? Because there's a lot of funding out there. The one thing I just wanted to mention is that just as a development partner, even though we're not the ADBs and the World Bank, what we've done is through our private sector network, we actually set up a digital platform where companies can, and we have more than 400 companies which have now registered, done their ESG disclosures, and they're using that, many of them, to get concessional financing from their governments. But then you need to have the enabling environment to do that. Similarly, we're taking the smaller companies, innovators, entrepreneurs, to various investment summits like the ASEAN Investment Forum so that they can connect with these kinds of impact investors to access these funds. These are small ticket investments, but this is also a very important part of the climate financing discussion. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very rich discussions. I've been someone who has been in the middle of these negotiations for while I was the minister. My point is, we are still talking the same language. We are still using the same vocabularies. We have also heard of the incapacity or inability for SAARC, comparing SAARC to EU. While we wait for the geopolitical issues to be resolved and for SAARC to be able to wake up and start working, there are a lot of opportunities that we can take through private partnerships, shared vision for the region. Now, Maldives is one of the countries, like Nepal, which is suffering immensely due to the actions of other countries. What happens in Arctic, for example, affects Maldives in many ways. My point is that we have got lots of experts sitting here in this panel. Why don't we talk about the solutions, what we can do as a group, as private sector, as stakeholders, as funders, as international partners, not talk about the challenges, because we all know what our challenges are. And another point that I want to bring is in this financial discussions, Green Climate Fund or any other funding issues, as the gentleman over here mentioned, you know, gender is missing. Women's voices are not heard. So these are the points that I would like to make, and I would like to hear from the panelists over here as to what we can do, not as governments, but as private sectors, as funders, as banks, to try and reduce the bureaucracy, to try and share the resources. Like, for example, Maldives does not have a lot of resources in terms of this kind of expertise, but we can share with the people and then come up with a regional vision and then work together. And I would like to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, the last intervention from Dr. Sheeta Giri from Bhutan.
Thank you very much. Sita Giri from Bhutan, representing the MSMEs in Bhutan. Thank you, presenters, for highlighting some of the challenges with the climate financing, the loss and damages, and also, of course, the increasing number of losses, lives lost, despite all the improvement and risk reduction. But also, we heard some good examples from the banking sector. As a MSME, I wanted to highlight or ask the panelists, early this year there was a research that stated by 2050 there would be median income loss of 22%. What experiences or opportunities or learning do we have in terms of anticipatory actions and risk shifting or risk transfer? Thank you very much.
From Sanjay. So you have 2 minutes to respond to the question, pointed questions or any other general question you would like to respond to. Start.
Yeah, 4 points I'll just make. One on carbon credits, of course, ma'am will answer, but I think let's also, unlike CDM, this new carbon regime will also have a lot more domestic component by developed countries. So please, and as Maria ma'am already asked, please work on your own carbon markets in countries. That's the way forward. That's the solution. Don't rely on carbon credits coming from developed countries because they would like to do that more internally. So let's be that. Alba, you said deal is bad or deal is not bad, or why I just explained why I think that it's no deal would have been better. We are talking about $300 billion US by 2035, while NDCs are to be submitted by 2030. So revised NDCs to be, so we need money till 2030, not 2035. So what they are committing is that 2035, very unlikely, we will have 300 billions while we need it now. So that's why, I mean, bringing back those 300 billion to 2030 will be a challenge. And that's why I feel that money will not be available for these revised NDCs. And we need revised NDCs now. Bridging the gap of temperature by 2035 will not make it, because by then we will lose a lot more people to the climate disaster, and that's my worry. And that's why I think no deal would have been better. Pradeep ji, absolutely agree, and I'm fan of multilateralism, but I agree multilateralism is in peril, but but we need to rethink whether, is it agenda too heavy now? We're talking about justice, we're talking about finance, we're talking everything, starting from environmental COP to now full package COP. Is it environment agenda heavy multilateralism? So we need to think through. Because multilateralism certainly needs reforms. We know that this kind of multilateralism is going to put countries into debt. We know it is giving us a very delayed response and people are dying. And we know that it is increasing inequity between countries. So we certainly need a multilateralism that works on them rather than support these things. Dr. Pandey, NCQG was totally about numbers. It's the distribution or access which talks about gender empowerment. And that happens through institutions, Green Climate Fund, Adaptation Fund, Loss and Damage Fund, where gender safeguards, environmental safeguards, social safeguards, they all has been listed and they are applied very judiciously. So NCQG was only to get number and from where. That was the idea, and that's why you will not find gender or anything there. Yeah, I'll stop here. And yes, on Trump, I'm not optimistic about finance now. Totally agree. I share your apprehension.
Thank you so much, Sanjay. So, Pranisa, you have your 2 minutes now.
Just wrapping around it. What are the best practices that we have been following is, I have already spoken about the strengthening the in-house expertise, and also I want to touch, because we have already talked about all the adaptations or strategies that we can do on the sustainable banking. I just want to touch upon the gender part, where I think this is something that we as a bank realized in the past 5 years, how we can in-house develop those kinds of modality on the gender inclusion perspective. So we started, we saw the statistics and we saw the leadership, women leadership was lacking in an organization, and we have developed our women leadership programs. From there, we have now proudly says that in the 7 provinces we have a women-led branches, and that is also reflecting our gender inclusion part, and that has been a replica for the customer side also. So we, as we have seen in the previous speakers and notified that 99% of businesses upholds the SME businesses. Business segments. So we are also going deep-rooted on the business continuity plan and awareness about them, how the businesses can be impacted with the climate change, and what are the pros and cons for that. So the deep-rooted understanding regarding to them is one of the essential part that bank is also looking into it. And yes, our expertise on the hydro and renewable energy will be a part of our journey regarding to it. And I think we'll conclude on that part. Thank you.
Thank you. Radeshji, 2 minutes.
Thank you. I don't know where to get in, but I just want to, give my perspective actually. We've been talking about this climate finance, and I think we've had these kind of, a lot of sittings, right? And I totally agree with the minister from Maldives. I mean, we need to get into action. How the hell do we get into action? That's the question I ask. What is the private sector supposed to do? What is the government providing the private sector? And it's not just about a country, I think. We're talking about the world, right? And we're talking about all these funds, all these, but honestly, how is Nepal, or for that matter, South Asia, going to benefit from that? I think it's something that all of us should sit down on a table. We have a lot of theories, right? Everyone has a theory. We understand what needs to happen in the long run. But I think in order to get into action and implement, there is so much that needs to be done, especially because we just don't have the money. I mean, we have, there's survival. There's like day-to-day survival that's required. There's food, to be kept on the table. And we're talking about this climate, this and that. I guess that's what goes on in general, population's mind. So I think we need to think about how do we change the mindset of people to attract that. It cannot happen just by Prime Minister's meeting and deciding, okay, we'll do this. It cannot happen just by signing an MOU or a document between people. So that's very, very challenging. I don't think it's an easy task. Secondly, I think what should private sector do? I think there again, private sectors also, I think we need to start not only talking about within a country, but having these sort of dialogues between private sector in different countries. I think private sector they need to pay, right? I mean, if we basically when things are commercially viable, you give something back to the society, back to the government, and back to the people. So the idea of having this, charging 0.1% in all financial transactions all over the world, something like that. But that needs to be, again, agreed by various players in the world. So again, I'm kind of like, I know we talk a lot about good things. Talking is great, but actually making it happen has always been the biggest challenge. And I'm not trying to be cynical, but I think action implementation is very important. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Pamita?
Thank you. One question from Professor Mustafizur Rahman regarding carbon credit market in Bangladesh. We have a carbon credit market, but this is very small, very low, and very few carbon reduction projects actually. Because there is lack of awareness and lack of legal framework, and also the lack of expertise for developing carbon reduction projects. So far, ITCOL, Infrastructure Development Company Limited of Bangladesh, they have sold about little over $16 million for 2.53 million carbon credits. And from two sectors, that is, one is improved cook stoves, and the second one is solar home system. So, but Bangladesh has a high potential for carbon markets. It can earn about $1 billion per year. And Bangladesh has also committed NDCs, about 21%. I mean, conditional is 15%, unconditional is about 6.7%. So we can take advantage of these commitments. And Pradeep, yes, thank you for reminding. I had on my list regarding the innovative sources like crowdfunding and philanthropic funding as well. And I want to also address Rupa's comment that impact investment for MSMEs so that they can access these funds. You see, one of the problems in our part of the world is that many MSMEs, particularly micro and small enterprises, they have difficulties to access funds for some technical reasons. For example, they do not have trade license for some reasons. I mean, they are functioning, operating in an informal mode. So that deters them in accessing funds from formal sources. So we have to also think about, they also don't want to come under that coverage. So whether those rules can be made flexible for them is something we can ponder about. Thank you.
Thank you, Famida. So our keynote speaker, John Samuel, has agreed to respond to some of these questions. John, your thoughts on some of these questions?
In fact, towards the end of my presentation, I have given specific 4 policy suggestions, right? In terms of what government needs to do, what the international community, particularly OECD, needs to do, etc. About the gender issue, that is fundamental. Now, we need to really see the governance generally is a patriarchal governance. And that needs to be challenged. And that's the point. It is nothing to do with only climate change. The inequality and injustice, which is at the core of all kinds of marginalization, including gender marginalization, that needs to be challenged. Now, climate crisis exacerbate the existing patriarchal governance mode, and that needs to be addressed. The second issue is the role of private sector. Now, this is where one has to have a caveat. If you really look at in Asia, across Asia, it's crony capitalism. And crony capitalism what? Private sector, the big ones, funds the elections. And they get elected. And then they get tax concession. So instead of taxing the rich, they tax the poor. So instead of what you really look at the tax structures, instead of direct tax, it's indirect tax. And who are the people who pay more tax? It's the poor. We have done these studies. That is one we need to really understand. And then you really look at it, what we can do. We have to go on, something which I have been doing is, we need to ask green financing and green, budget as an obligatory condition. The Planning Commission should say. In my, I come from Kerala, which was one of the first green budget initiative which was done. And green budget and gender budget, right? Green and gender budget will have to be done in a necessary way as a framework. And that's the first advocacy we need to ask our own government. right? First, that is it. So it's easy to go and say OECD is not doing this and that, but what our governments are doing. So governance should be a parameter. Second thing is private sector's responsibility is one thing, but when private sector elites and government elites and bureaucratic elites becomes a nexus to keep on telling, giving promises and telling lies, literally, which is basically betraying the people, betraying the democracy. So the point about it is democracy is in peril everywhere. You know, and that is where in a democratic society women will have equality. There will be gender equalities. Gender inequality includes LGBT. And in a democratic society, people will have an inclusive space. Unfortunately, in the time of Trump, you know, what is happening is there is a whole effort to cut the finance, to, you know, muscle out the differences, to shut up those who speak truth to power, and not to give space to the civil society. So one of the things is not only gender, civic space is a must. Without civil and political rights, people cannot speak out, right? And then you cannot even ask questions. So some of these things will have to be also raised in the context of climate crisis. So climate crisis exasperate, but the issues precedes these climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. John, now?
One good practice.
Okay.
I should say that. I think the only one airport in the world, which is a private sector public sector airport, which is so green, totally green, on their investment is Cochin Airport in the whole world. So it's totally solar, and the investment come from, you know, and they got the UN award for that. The green technology, they don't use grid at all. They give, you know, electricity, the solar to the grid.
Brilliant. Thank you. So, Secretary Marasini, you have the last word.
Much has been already spoken, so I will keep my intervention short. 2-3 points. When Dr. Pandey was talking about this geopolitics and the election in the US, I was just wondering, I was comparing Nepal's net zero commitment by 2045 and then India's net zero commitment by 2070. There is the politics, maybe, you know, even if like Nepal does every effort until and unless our big neighbors or our neighboring countries, other countries also in the region, do that sort of commitment in advance or in a timely manner, then our commitments will be just a commitment. That's number one. Number two, I think someone here raised the issue of quality of climate financing. That's very true, that we have to really be careful. The quality in terms of, you know, when we talk about the climate financing, especially the grant financing, then most of the chunk of that finance is taken away as we pay huge amount to international consultants. And also we pay huge amount to meet the conditions of that funding. So that has to be also, you know, well considered and well discussed, number one. Number two, as Ratnakarji has, you know, raised also in the beginning, the process, the complexity of obtaining or getting approval of a climate finance project is quite long. It takes around 3 to 4 years only to get approved that particular project. Forget about how many more years it takes to get that project implemented. So there is a whole lot of spider nets in the donors fund, donors side as well. So we have to have our common voice to break this complexity and these nets, right? And number three is that, you know, mostly these climate funds do not directly support to the government. They instead go to these accredited agencies. Somehow they wanted to deal with the third party, not with directly with the government, Who is accountable, who is responsible? Greening the economy. Because the accredited agencies are very smaller agencies and they don't have that sort of accountability. This is also one of the critical areas that we have to, raise our voice and make this financing, delivered, not only it remains as a whole of promises. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. A round of applause. Brilliant remarks. Now let me try and sum up in 5 bullet points because I don't have time, right? So first bullet point is the institutions matter. Institutions matter, Secretary Marasani, institutions matter, Pradeep, everybody talked about it. Institutions matter not only at the national level but also at the regional level, right? So if there is there's a need to revive certain defunct institutions, let's try and revive them. If they do not work, let's try to create them. If they do exist, then let's try to strengthen them. So if track 1 does not work, let's work with track 1.5, track 1.2, track 2 or track 3, but let's keep this going. So that's number 1. Number 2 is multilateralism is important, keep it alive, even if it is delivering suboptimal outcomes, because a suboptimal multilateralism is better than unilateralism. I think that's something that it's a major takeaway, I guess. Yeah. So the third one is do it yourself. Do it yourself. Just do it. I mean, even if you can follow the Nike's slogan, just do it. Don't wait for others to provide resources, technology, or knowledge or whatever. Because if your challenge, try and solve them, right? I mean, if you don't want to do anything about mitigation, I mean, don't do it. But then work on adaptation and loss and damage. And that's where the preparedness and all of those things that Dr. Sitagiri was raising becomes very, very, very important. The fourth point is we should not only be talking about green finance, we should be talking about inclusive green finance, right? So I'm there, NMB Bank, I think, Pranisha mentioned about some of the things that they have done, and that's one example, but then we need to be inclusive, in terms of providing green finance and the kind of green and gender budget that you mentioned, John, and this is very, very important point that you made. I think, this is worth emulating by others. Other than the airport, Kochi airport, I think that's also a good practice that you mentioned. Then finally, let's get into action. Mariam, you mentioned about this and it was picked up by some other panelists, including Mr. Radesh Pant. Let's get into action. One of the objectives of this discussion that we are having here, in the regional discussion that we are having here in Kathmandu, is to come up with ideas that are implementable, that are practical, that are implementable, including changing the mindset of people that, you have to go beyond talk shop. Otherwise, this would remain a talk shop, and this is something that we don't want to do. So with these words, I would like to thank all the parties, all the panelists, as well as participants for your active participation. Thank you so much. We'll discuss this during tea break. Yes, of course. This is something, Pradeep, you forgot. You forgot that, in the beginning I mentioned, in my opening remark, I mentioned green finance. Green finance is much broader than climate finance, and the first point I mentioned is biodiversity.